I came to this area in the mid-1970s and I was just overwhelmed. It was so beautiful, just such an amazing area. And I thought to myself, people can get here now in the weekend. The wine industry started, the surfies have come. This area is going to really develop. And according to the way it develops, I'll either want to be here in 20, 30 years' time or I won't. And I think planning is the key to that. So I became involved in planning. And obviously one of the huge values of this shire is the amazing coastline. It's a wild coastline, got very few safe swimming places on it. But it's magnificent and it draws people to it because there's really nothing like it in the world. I was pleased at that stage to see that the state government was basically taking up that issue and had recognised the value of the ridge. The state government had started collecting together all the A and C class reserves along the ridge to form a national park, which we now have, the Lower Naturalist National Park. In the 70s, they started to look at, all right, what's the private land along the ridge? And there were 2 blocks of land south of what we know as the Prevelly town site, and they were totally unzoned, big blocks of land. They belonged to, or they had originally belonged to Colonel Le Swift, who's quite famous in state history and in local history because he was the one who made the South Perth Zoo basically what it is today. He formed the basis of that zoo and what's been built on it. And there is actually a rumour that those 2 blocks of land, which were totally unzoned, they weren't zoned for anything, rural, residential, anything at all. There's a rumour that they were granted to him by state government in recognition of the work that he did at the South Perth Zoo in the 1930s. I've not been able to find any evidence to back this, so whether it's just a story, I don't know, but that's who these blocks belong to, Colonel Le Swift. When he died, they passed on to his son, who was always also very well known, Dr. Le Swift, in the area. And in the 1970s, the state government commissioned a geomorphologist to look at the private land held along the ridge to see where possible development could happen and where it couldn't, basically. That geomorphologist, Patrick Hesp, said of those 2 blocks of land, there could be possibly a minor development of the current Prevelly town site, but there were a lot of considerations to be made and a lot of areas that really needed protection in them. That land then passed into the hands of a developer, Margaret River Land Holdings, Mark Honan. And then the applications for development started happening. The first one was a sort of a timeshare, I think in the 80s, got knocked back by the council of the day. And then we didn't hear anything anymore until the 90s. So in 1990, a plan came forward to council from a Japanese development company. Council was told that the land had been sold to this Japanese company and they were putting forward a development for a golf course residential on the coast right across those 2 big blocks of land. And there was to be about 800 houses, a golf course, a hotel, etc., etc. It was a long struggle in council to have a look at it. People submitted to say that they didn't want such a development, that it would be destructive to tourism and destructive to the environment, that we have a wild and spectacular but not safe coast here, and in our shire we have very few safe swimming places, and Gnarabup, the little bay there, is one of those. To put such a massive development on the coast was just not good planning. There was a lot of discussion in the Council of the Day, and I was on the Council of the Day, and finally the Council rejected it, as did WAPC. And our planner of the day, Peter Gleed, recommended to the Council that we should have a look at the two lots, a good look at it, and see what needed to be protected, what could be developed, and a task force was formed with state and local planning in it. So they had representation from WAPC, the Department of Planning and local government, and they worked on that and did an amazingly good planning document for it. That planning document is called the Prevelly Guidelines, and it went to Council finally, and Council adopted it with a clause to say that the development should not be greater than, in residential or tourist terms, than the current Prevelly town site, reflecting what had happened in state government planning already. And that was adopted and formed the basis of a town planning scheme, so that those two lots were finally zoned. And that town planning scheme was called TPS 18. In that town planning scheme and in those Prevelly guidelines, the state and the local planning immediately identified one site that should not be developed, and that's the site that we're now looking at a hotel site for. It was identified as visually important, and it was to be zoned as landscape protection, and that's what went forward into the town planning scheme. However, the developer appealed to the Minister of the day, Richard Lewis, as you could in those days, to overturn that. And the Minister overturned it and said that it could be a lodge site of 120 rooms on there. And so he directed Council of the day to zone it lodge site / landscape protection. And so that went forward then into the town planning scheme. The Minister overrode all that amazing planning, expensive in time, expensive in money, from both state and local government. Council objected. There were objections from the task force, from state planning, but the Minister won the day, and the Council were forced to put that in and zone it as lodge site landscape protection. The limiting clause was really important because it basically said that there was to be a limitation to the development that could happen on those lots. Council of the day basically, or Council right from that day of the 1993, I think it went through, right up to 2005, held to the limiting clause for development on that site. And it had been written in a way whereby development applications had to show a structure plan which complied with the town planning scheme and with that limited development clause. The development to the east went ahead with all the residential, and that's quite normal because it's the residential lots that make the money for the developer. Once he's put in the infrastructure, he can then sell off those lots, recoup any costs that he has had or she has had, and make profits. However, the land on the west side of Wallcliffe Road, both that lodge site that was supposed to be protected and the tourist site to the south of that, there was no development for quite a long, or no development application for quite a long time. Pretty well until the developer realised, or the developer actually looked at, I think perhaps on selling what could happen there. And an application came to council for a structure plan, as was required, to show development on that tourist site of 210 apartments. At that time, the local community, the Preverley Wilderness Progress Association, had realised that actually the development had put tourism onto the site at the corner there of Wallcliffe and Riedel, which was zoned originally for commercial/community infrastructure. It had put tourism there. It had sold off a block which became then the Backpackers, and the area that had originally been had been told to council would be aged housing was now what we know as a break. And it was largely tourism. So the local community pointed out that actually the tourism component had been well and truly filled already, and that there was no development potential for west of Wallcliffe Road. The protection west of Wallcliffe Road depended on that limiting clause that was there, and the application for the 210 apartments was rejected by council. It was rejected by WAPC as being too dense, and council held on to and protected from a number of Supreme Court cases the protecting clause, the limiting clause for development there. There were two community groups who took cases regarding the development to the Supreme Court. In WA, we don't have third-party appeal rights to any tribunal. We're the only state in Australia that doesn't. So it means that if a group that's concerned about something wants to object to the fact that they think things are not being done correctly, they can only take it to the Supreme Court, which is an arduous process. The first time this happened was to do with the sewerage site. On the original structure plan that the community had seen for development, it was some way up the ridge on the east side of Wallcliffe Road. But suddenly it was being built at what has now become affectionately called Gas Bay. It wasn't Gas Bay before there was a sewage plant there. And so the community was rather upset about this, and the local community group went to the Supreme Court about it. They lost and eventually had to fold, although the Department of Water didn't press any charges for costs for them. I think they were possibly quite glad that somebody had actually raised the issue. And there was a parliamentary inquiry into it, which said that no further development or expansion of that site, of that sewerage site, should occur. The other case was that was taken by Lewin Conservation Group, a long-standing conservation group in the Shire, which I happened to be chair of at the time, in 2002, I think. At the time when Council was looking at the structure plan for the tourist site, it was out for public advertising. The developers put in an application to subdivide that tourist site into 3 or 4 lots, and WAPC granted that at the time when there was a development application out for 1 lot. The case was taken by the Environmental Defenders Office, and Ian Barker QC took the case for us. And although we showed that the process that had been followed by WAPC was incorrect in two places, the full court of the Supreme Court decided that our group did not have standing, which means that we didn't have enough interest in it to actually take it there in the first place. So we lost, and the costs were awarded against us. The WAPC that we'd taken the case against did not press charges, but the developer did. And that group, Lewin Conservation Group, which, as I say, was a long-standing group, and unfortunately it had to fold as well. But council, and a number of councils, from 1993, when that town planning scheme went through, right up to 2005, held firm that the development had to comply with that limiting clause. This was obviously a problem for the developers, and in 2005 a new council came in. It was chaired by Steve Harrison, and an application from the developers went in to WAPC for a structure plan which was far more intense than the one that had just been knocked back. Normally, if you're putting in a development application or a structure plan, you can put it into council, and council has a look at it and votes as to whether it will... it puts it up for public advertising if it's important enough, and votes as to whether it will agree with it or not. Then it goes to the WAPC, who make the final decision. Or you can put it into the WAPC, in which case the WAPC write to the local council and ask the local council for comment, and the process goes through that way. Well, the developer put it into the WAPC, who then wrote to council asking for council comment. The CEO of the day, James Trail, later charged by, or recommended to be charged by the CCC and charged by the Department of Local Government, and those charges were upheld, wrote back to WAPC and said council didn't really want to comment. It's difficult to find out exactly how that happened and why it didn't go to council, but it was claimed that by the Shire President Steve Harrison that council had given delegated authority to the CEO to do it. Highly unusual when it was an application which the community had shown so much passion about. The CEO wrote and said that council wasn't interested in commenting, and WAPC waited for a while and then, as I understand it, wrote back urging that the council should comment. I don't know what happened at that stage, whether the CEO, James Trail, just didn't answer, or whether he just wrote back again and said, no, we don't want to. But one way or the other, that meant that the community did not hear that this application for a structure plan had gone in. So it didn't have a chance to comment. It didn't have a chance to point out that it was totally inconsistent with the town planning scheme. It was, I feel, a betrayal by council at that stage. After all those other councils, from the date that that town planning scheme was adopted up till that point, from 1993, and a council before that, the whole, from 1990 onwards till 2005, had upheld basically what the community had been asking for and what state and local government planning had directed. And so the WAPC, getting no response from council, waited a bit longer and then passed that structure plan through. And that, in effect, began the loss of that limiting clause, that protecting clause that community and council had created and fought for so long. The council then passed through its local planning scheme, and the limiting clause was dropped. So we now have an application for a hotel on a site that was supposed by local and state planning to be protected, and we have an application we haven't got an application, we've just got concept plans, I think. But we've been told by this new developer that he will be applying for a mix of residential and tourist on the remaining sites. And that's a worry, because that was supposed to be a tourist site. In the first place, it was supposed to be camping caravan. It's sort of gone up a bit from there. It no longer has that protecting clause that the community and council created. However, in 2015, I was again on council at that stage, and council passed through its local tourism strategy. That tourism strategy identified, I think, about 5 sites around the Shire which were tourist sites, which should be protected from being changed to residential, because there often is a push to go from residential, from tourist to residential. One of those sites was that site, which is now 4 lots there, and which this developer is saying will be a mixture of residential and tourist. To me, that's an incredible danger for this area, because if you put more residential on this area, you really are increasing the the pressure on this coastline and this small, safe swimming space which has to cater for all of Margaret River and beyond. The tourism that's being looked at now that they don't have that limiting clause, is again well and truly beyond all the well done planning of local and state government. It's something that this community will regret. The tourists come here to this coastline because of its wildness. It's getting wilder. I think this is the windiest winter I have seen in over 40 years. Our coastline is being battered because that land, hotel and tourist site up there is on limestone cliffs. That doesn't protect it from what it's getting now and what it will increasingly get from climate change. It's something that I feel all of our shire should be aware of and should resolve to fight as strongly as it can. I am just so pleased to see young people, because I'm now so old, taking up the fight because they care about it, and they care about it as much as I cared when I came here as a 30-year-old myself, and just was blown away with the magnificence of this shire and of the Lewin Naturalist Ridge.